From branding expert in New York City to urban farming on the northern beaches of Sydney, in this episode we get a glimpse of the future of farming.
From Blue Tribe Media, this is the Good Business Podcast, the show where we talk to business leaders, social entrepreneurs and innovators about aligning profit with purpose and how you can make doing good, good for business. Now here's your host, James McGregor.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Good Business Podcast. In this episode, I've visited Hugh McGilligan, who's the CEO at SproutStack at their facility on the northern beaches of Sydney, which is Australia's only commercial-scale vertical farm, where they grow a range of nutritious, delicious, sustainable and locally grown salads for the Sydney market with an innovative system using repurposed shipping containers. Now, as a kid, Hugh spent his summers working in traditional agriculture on his uncle's farm in the UK before embarking on a corporate career in branding and advertising, mostly in New York City. After moving to Australia and the arrival of his first child, he began a reappraisal of the important things in life. In this episode, we hear about Hugh's journey from branding expert in New York City to the challenges of building an innovative urban farming business. And you'll also get some practical advice from a branding expert on how to build a brand that your customers love and that also does great things in the world. So let's check it out. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you ended up leading an indoor farming business. So who is Hugh McGilligan?
That's a very deep and meaningful question. My background is not in agriculture, other than spending time on farms growing up, trying to earn pocket money over the summer when I was volunteering or voluntold on my on my uncle's farm to pick potatoes or chase sheep around. I actually spent most of the past 15 years in New York City, ultimately as a partner in a brand strategy consulting firm. And my wife dragged me to Australia kicking and screaming, telling me that the Northern Beaches is a much better place to raise a family than the East Village. And she's probably got a point. And when I arrived here and almost immediately had a child, there was, frankly, a bit of an epiphany. There was a moment in which I realized that I'd spent a lot of time helping write other people's stories. And it was important at this juncture for me to write my own story and for the story to be in some way positively impactful to the world, leave the world a bit of a better place than I found it and leave a positive legacy, figure out a problem that we can solve. And so I applied, I guess my innate skills of curiosity and business acumen or whatever else to what I thought was one of the biggest problems that I could identify, which is food safety and food security.
So tell us, so we're here at SproutStacks facilities. So just to set the scene for everyone. So we're in I guess more like a semi-industrial estate, and there's a whole lot of shipping containers downstairs, and effectively what's a large car park growing fresh food. How did SproutStack where did the idea come from, and what was the origin story behind SproutStack?
So look, from a macro trends point of view, something like SproutStack has to be the way that we produce food in the future, right? So the numbers speak for themselves. By 2050, we'll have 10 billion people on the planet. We're going to have to double our food production within that time frame. And the systems that we have in place that were designed during the Industrial Revolution, which is to say food grown on the periphery, transported into cities, are at this point fairly strained and will not scale to the point that will satisfy the population that we'll have in 20 years' time. So something like what we have downstairs has to be the way that food is produced to satisfy the 70% of people who are going to live in urban centers come that time frame. I wasn't in the business at its inception. The guys downstairs were, and the directors from the fund that have bankrolled us have, and they saw these big trends. They saw the movement of and the focus to controlled environment agriculture in the US, in Europe, in Israel, and thought there has to be something like this in Australia. There wasn't, and so they decided to start their own. And in short, the story is one of trial and error. We've got a brilliant head of manufacturing, a guy called Michael, who has basically designed the way that their system works downstairs with the hydroponic solution and LED lights and a recycled shipping container to produce vast quantities of highly nutritious, nutrient-dense, sustainable, and delicious fresh produce.
So I understand the bigger mission and the trends around the need for urban agriculture, but the mums and dads out there who are purchasing your product, solving the world's agriculture problems is not a problem they're trying to solve. So what's the SproutStacks product? Well, what is it giving to your ultimate consumer?
That's a great question, because I think that there are an awful lot of people who want to be sustainable, want to buy the right option for the planet, but when there's a $2 difference, will actually often go for the cheaper product. And what we provide is not just a more sustainable produce than stuff that's grown in traditional agriculture, but also produce that is more nutritious. So the average time from harvest to delivery in store from traditional agriculture is about a week. So our largest competitor grows primarily in Victoria, is harvested and then transported in cold chain from the field to the store. It takes on average about a week. We harvest, as you saw downstairs, and will deliver to a store within 4 to 12 hours. Depending on what time of day we're harvesting. That means that the food that we deliver is more nutritionally dense because it hasn't undergone the nutritional degradation that takes place with all fresh produce from the point of harvest. The nutritional degradation occurs in a parabolic curve, so it comes off a cliff basically as soon as you cut the stem. And the data that came out of studies from UC Davis in California in the 90s say that within 3 days it's lost 30% of its nutritional value. So what we're producing is product that is nutritionally dense, that is fresher, that is delicious and nutritious, and that is free from pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides, and also has a much smaller environmental impact than traditional agriculture.
How much work did you do with your end consumers, the end customer, in terms of developing and testing this and feedback you've been getting from them? How did you go about validating that people wanted that sort of product?
That's actually a really interesting question, because up until recently, we'd done very little. We kind of knew that we're onto a good thing, but we'd done very little to tell and to do anything to tell our story. And in part, the reason why I took this job is because I'm good at telling stories, and I'm able to understand the consumer and actually talk to the consumer and convert their needs into a product proposition. In speaking to our customers, what we've found is that while the sustainability angle is interesting, while the technology aspect is interesting, what is really valuable to them is this local, the local story, that we're a local business, that we're up against the big guys, and that we are ticking all of the boxes around food safety, food security, and food input, so understanding where your food comes from, and that's actually shifted the way that we talk about our produce.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing for people to understand. So we work exclusively in environmental social impact type projects, but very rarely do we ever lead with the environmental social impact. So we have a saying within our business is sell them what they want, but give them what they need. And by that we mean it's basically sustainability by stealth. So come up with a solution that solves a problem for your customer or a need for your customer, and as a consequence of them using your solution, then you deliver on the environmental social outcomes, but you don't lead with that. It's like the cherry on the cake. It's a nice thing to have, but most consumers don't necessarily wake up in the morning going, I need to solve the world's agriculture problems, for example. They want to go, I want to feed my kids healthy food and make sure they're fit and healthy, and I know where it comes from, and I'm not putting things in my body that I don't know what's in it.
Correct. And look, SproutStack and actually all controlled environment agriculture is the solution to a series of problems that are increasingly common currency amongst at least an educated, I'd say, large minority at this point. That around, where does my food come from? What is the total cost of ownership of that food? How much water did it take to produce? How far has it been transported? How many fertilizers or nutrients went into producing? How much carbon goes into producing that much that fertilizer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are leaner, greener, meaner than traditional agriculture, and as such, we provide a great product that has all of those underlying attributes that consumers are increasingly looking for, whether explicitly or implicitly.
I assume that it just all went swimmingly, right? There was never any problems from day one. Once the idea was born and it's been smooth sailing, what were some of the challenges that SproutStacks had to overcome, I guess, from day one? Because, for example, I understand some of your early business models was the original concepts about how the business would scale and grow turned out to not work.
I guess our greatest challenge that we're in the process of solving is this disconnect that it currently exists between a lot of consumers and the food that they are buying. A lot of kids have no idea that where a steak comes from other than from a plastic packet they buy at the supermarket. And where apples come from, where greens come from, have no idea how complicated or complex the system is that delivers food to the supermarket, and therefore fail to understand the value proposition that we've presented. That said, as I said earlier, the common currency, those problems are increasingly becoming common currency for a large number of consumers. Educated, wealthy consumers tend to understand our proposition. Yeah, it turns out it's very difficult to grow plants in a controlled environment. Within the ag tech space, there's businesses that lean more towards agriculture, and there's businesses that lean more towards tech. And the ones that lean more towards tech tend to have a much harder time because they're run by technologists, computer scientists, developers, and whatever, who assume that you can apply the same metrics of control to agriculture as you can to computer systems. And you just can't. So one of our challenges was actually finding that nice middle ground between dealing with a biological system like a plant and harnessing the value of technology. And it was never a straight course, but for the most part, it was up and to the right. So we've had some success, and as we've scaled on our trial and error, we've iterated and got a system that downstairs that seems to be working and is scalable.
Do you have a process that you go through to test and refine and iterate?
Not so much a formalized process. Yeah, I mean, yes, of course, we track all of our metrics. We track our harvest. We track our biomass yield from each of the processes. We have an R&D lab in which we trial things out. But at least up until now, most of that has been done kind of in an ad hoc way and refining from learning and seeing and applying.
So putting on your branding hat, so looking at, you've got this environmental social impact story around your product. How do you bring branding into that piece? What is the role of branding in terms of getting that product to market?
That's a brilliant question because it's something that we're actually evolving right now. And it was put to me very eloquently by one of the store managers from our retail partner who told me that people come to Harris Farms to buy stories. And as of right now, nobody knows our story. So our challenge is to tell that story concisely in a way that's meaningful, that's providing value to the people who are willing to pay an extra $1 for our product. And the way that we've done that is to really try and distill our messages down to a single proposition. What's the one thing that we've got? And the one thing that we have got is our location, that we're locally grown. And that we're locally grown and for Sydney. So it basically means we have eradicated food miles. And for some people, that's enough. Right? Some people, they know that we grow in Brookvale. Oh yeah, you're my neighbor. I'm sure I'll buy your products. It doesn't really matter about all of the other things that cascade from being local, as in being more nutritious because it doesn't have that nutritional degradation, being more sustainable because it doesn't have the carbon output, being more an impact for the community because we hire from disadvantaged communities, for example, or for being an advocate, an engaged participant in education. We partner with a lot of local schools, for example, who come and do tours and understand, try and reconnect kids with their food production. What that means, though, is they're all aspects of being a local producer. So we then need to make sure that everything we do then cascades from being local. So all of our messaging is about being local. Our product packaging currently was all designed because it was the most cost-effective way of bringing our product to market. We're going to invest a little bit more, change the labels to convey the provenance of the food. So you'll see our labels will evolve from being pretty functional now to being a little bit bigger, giving us more real estate to tell our story. Will involve the semiotics or the visual language of the northern beaches. So maybe a lighthouse, maybe a pine tree. And even the name of our products will evolve from being, say, the micro mix of micro herbs that we currently sell to the Manly micros. We've got a Brookie Bonanza because to celebrate our move to Brookvale, we've decided to create a varietal or a salad pack that celebrates that move to our new premises.
Yeah, great. So I hope everyone's listening closely there. Our brains have evolved to minimize calorie consumption. And if they've got to think too hard to understand your story, then they're going to switch off. So it's distilling it down to that, really simple message and using clever things like the Manly mescaline mix or the Brookvale basil. I don't know. You can take that. You can trademark that if you like. It's an easy way for people to immediately connect to that local story.
And look, the other thing that as a marketer, I learn't two really important lessons. The first is that you are not your target audience more often than not. And so you can't take your biases into your product development. So you go out and research, go out and learn who you're trying to sell to. The second is that nobody cares as much about your brand as you do. we've done pop-ups in stores quite consistently over the past couple of months where we've been giving free samples in the supermarket. And it's given us an opportunity to basically stand and observe the salad counter. And watching people make a decision between one brand and another is an instantaneous decision. People walk up and go, and they pick up one and they look at the back to make sure that it's fresh and they put it in there. You don't have time to deliver your 5 key value propositions or your reasons to believe or whatever else. You've got to get your message across consistently and very quickly.
Yeah, great. So originally the business model, you started off selling equipment. Is that right? So tell us about just maybe go back a little bit, one step to, why didn't that work and what did it evolve to?
Yeah, so originally the business was conceived around building the hardware. So we've got a pretty good process in converting a non-operating refrigerated 40-foot shipping containers into farms. And we thought that the business would be selling those to remote communities, to military bases, to mining towns, etc. Turns out that we weren't able to find much of a market for that. If we did find a market, it would involve so much spoon feeding of how to manage the farm that it soon became unscalable. So we haven't entirely rejected that business model. If somebody wants to buy a farm, I'm sure we will come to some sort of understanding. But it became clear that the best way for us to use this technology was actually to grow the produce ourselves, to add value to it, and then sell it through our retail partners.
So then you went through that. You basically tested the market, found that wasn't right, and then I assume along the way you learned actually how hard, because you said you start off as a technology engineering side of group, so it makes sense that we're going to build some tech and sell it to people, and we're not going to grow fruit and veg or salad type mixes. But then obviously you learn along the way that the actual growing part is actually really difficult.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, as I said, there's an arrogance that comes from the tech side of ag tech that is, we should be able to apply technology and everything should work. We are much more of the agricultural side of things. We have 2 trained agronomists on staff who manage the farms, who, go out and look at the leaves and make sure that things are growing as you expect them to, and if not, adjusting and tweaking as we go. So there's an art to agriculture. I grew up knowing that. My uncle was a lifetime farmer, and there's an intuition from farming that I don't think the technologists have as much respect for.
Yeah. So what does SproutStack look like today? So 2019? So
2019, we have just moved from a shed in Chatswood to this beautiful car park, as you called it, in Brookvale, which means that we have suddenly unshackled ourselves from a space constraint that we were suffering from. And what that means is we are in the process of expanding rapidly. We moved with 3 farms. 3 operational farms. Farm 4 is close to completion. Farm 5, the raw box for which will be delivered on in a couple of weeks and will be up and operational early in the new year. That means we're going to double output over the course of next year, and we're looking to do that again over the course of the subsequent year. Right now, we are 6 full-time employees and somewhere between 6 and 8 casual employees. We want to try to grow our output with a similar number of people, so we're not going to blow out our payrolls. We are deeply committed to the triple bottom line, which means that we are prepared to make money and do business, but without sacrificing the economy the environment, or without service to the local community. So we're an engaged and very committed member of local education groups like universities and schools, and we're going to very much continue that, because even if we aren't the future of food production, we want to educate and inspire a next generation of horticulturalists to get back in touch with the food that they're consuming.
And how big is your footprint at the moment in terms of distribution areas for your produce?
So our primary offtake agreement, so our primary sales channel, is through Harris Farm Markets. They take about 80 to 90% of what we produce, and they have 26 stores across New South Wales. Therefore, we sell from, Newcastle in the north down to Bondi in the south, and out to Bowen out west, is probably our footprint. Although we do have a couple of customers out in Tamworth, and we're prepared to engage new customers as long as we can deliver to them, and so long as it doesn't take away from that local story, because otherwise it kind of defeats the object, right? The idea is we scale here to the point at which we're profitable, and then the farms that we have become seed corn for to clone the business interstate. So whereas we have a Brookie Bonanza, we might have a Geelong Extravaganza in Melbourne, or I'm going to run out of suburb, but you get the idea. Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, etc.
Yeah. And just put it in context, I know when we did the tour earlier, we talked about it. What's sort of the production capacity of one of these shipping containers?
So each container has about a capacity of about 10,000 units, which is say 10,000 pots. And that would be 10,000 heads of lettuce. But because we don't just produce lettuce, that can also be peas or sprouts or amaranth or beets, depending on what we grow. A lettuce growth cycle is around 4.5 weeks. So we're producing, a good way to think about it is each of these containers has the agricultural equivalent of about a hectare's worth of space, just in terms of the number of turns we're able to produce per year.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I think before we worked out, it was roughly 2,500 head of lettuce a week, just to get people their heads in from one shipping container. So if there's other people out there who are trying to launch a new business or a social enterprise or business that really focuses on more than just profit, what advice would you have for them?
It comes back to that earlier point that we were talking about, that it's about articulating the customer proposition and being really faithful to it. It's very easy to get distracted and to muddy your message around what are all of the other benefits that you're actually providing. I mean, I'm super proud of the environmental impact that we're having. I'm super proud of the fact we hire from disadvantaged communities. But ultimately, as you said, the consumer doesn't really care about that. They like to know that they're probably doing that they're buying a product that's somewhat aligned to how they feel. But frankly, they want to buy a salad. And so long as there's a compelling consumer proposition, first and foremost, I think that's the most important thing. And so, I mean, of course, I'm a brand guy, so you give a guy a hammer, he thinks everything's a nail. I actually think this is always a communication problem or a communication challenge, which is to say, why is this clamshell of lettuce significantly better than the competitor's clamshell of lettuce? Well, it's because it's produced locally.
Yeah, that's the fundamentals, I think, for any good social or environmental impact business, is that you need to solve a really painful problem for your customers and have a great product that solves it really, really well. And then as a consequence of that, then you get your environmental social impact as opposed to, but I think the story also from a branding point of view, I think that story is really important as well behind the product, because there is certainly the millennial generation, but also even just in the general consumer, there is a big shift now to people wanting to understand where their products come from and how it's been sourced and is it ethically produced. And they want to know that, but if it costs them $2 more, then they probably won't pay for that. But if it's between your brand and another brand and all intents and purposes is equal, then they'll go for the purpose-driven brand every time.
Absolutely.
So if people want to purchase some produce or get in touch or learn more about what SproutStack's doing, what's the best way for them to get in touch or learn more?
So if you want to buy the product, go to Harris Farm Markets. If you want to get in touch, drop me an email, hugh@sproutsstack.co.
Great. Awesome. So let's wrap up with the Mad Minute. So 5 questions, 60 seconds. So what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
We try everything twice. The first time to see if it kills you, the second time to see if you like it.
I like that one. What's your favorite business book?
So I'm a bit torn about this. There's a book called Food or War, which is not really a business book, but it certainly encapsulates a lot of what why we're doing what we're doing right now. That said, as a business book, I think you can't do better than Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Yeah, great. Have you got a favorite business tool or resource that you use for delivering impact through the business?
I'm going to cheat on this one because we have a variety of different tools, but ultimately the best thing you can invest in is your team. And I know that I am standing on the shoulders of giants, that I couldn't be here without my head of production, without my head of manufacturing, who are brilliant consumer professionals upon whose shoulders this business rests.
Have you got a favorite quote?
I'd rather be ashes than dust. I think it's Jack London. I can't remember the rest of the quote, but it's about taking risks.
And if you could go back in time and give your 20-year-old self some advice, what would it be?
Take more risks. Not to sound too hippy-dippy about it, but if you leap, the universe conspires to catch you and put you where you're supposed to be. It took me too long to figure that out. And I forewent chances that I perhaps should have gone with because I was too worried about taking on too much debt or if I stuffed it up, what it might look like. Life's not a spectator sport. You've got to get in there and have a go. For sure. So Hugh McGilligan from SproutStack, thanks for your time, and look forward to seeing SproutStack produce all over the country, not too distant future. Brilliant. Thanks very much, James. Some Blue Tri Basil, anyone? Some great advice there from Hugh McGilligan at SproutStack.
So as we discussed in this episode, it's really important that your product or service solves a problem for your customer, because not every customer is going to be motivated by your social and environmental mission. So one of the most important skills for any business for good is to be able to sell your idea or your product. Our free ebook on selling sustainability will help you do just that, and you can access this through the show notes. Speaking of show notes, you can access the notes for today's episode by simply visiting www.bluetribe.co/podcast and check out episode number 6. So if you like today's episode, make sure you click that subscribe or follow button and leave a rating for us. Coming up in the next episode.
There's a fear, right? Like when you start something that especially when you put so much time and energy into something, there's a fear of, it's not going to work, or what if it fails, then what? And you don't want to have to go back to all your friends and family and say, well, I couldn't do it.
How having a clear social mission helped this entrepreneur overcome the fear of failure to make something great happen in the world. Well, that's it for another episode of the Good Business Podcast. But before you go, you might want to hang on for a few minutes to hear the audio site tour of SproutStack's facility right after I sign off. Thanks for listening. I'm James McGregor. Until next time. So this looks very funky. So we're looking at basically a shipping container with a purple coloured light. I assume that's particular wavelengths for the plants. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're in a standard non-operating refrigerated 40-foot shipping container.
Yep.
The type of which you can find in the back of any boat traveling the high seas. It's been stripped out, cleaned, and then you're looking at 6 bays within which we have trays of 20 plants, be they lettuce, micro herbs, micro greens, sprouts, pea tendrils, and the funky coloured lights are because the plants actually grow from the 2 ends of the light spectrum, blue and red, and everything else is kind of an inefficient use of the energy we use to generate the light. So we focus on the 2 ends of the spectrum and strip out all of the other light.
Okay.
This is the operation center. So we're now in the middle of the container.
Yep.
And this is the brain. So in here we have a environmental monitoring unit that's measuring temperature, humidity, and CO2 levels.
Yep.
Temperature and humidity are controlled by the air conditioning unit, and the CO2 by this CO2 canister with a doser on the back. Mm-hmm. And it's automatically retained within or maintained within a certain.
And so you run the CO2 levels higher than they would be outside?
Correct, about 800 parts per million. Same system for the hydroponic solution. Mm-hmm. This is our tank of hydroponic solution, and on a regular basis, anywhere between 1 to 4 times a day, the trays are flooded by the pump system up to a level here. Mm-hmm. And then drains. They drain automatically with gravity. As they go through the system, this dosing node measures the nutrition levels and the pH of the fluid to make sure it's appropriate for our plants.
Okay. And where does the nutrition, what's in those containers?
NPK. Well, there are 11 herbs and spices.
Okay. Within Colonel Sanders herbs and spices,
But it's a nitrogen, phosphate, potassium nutrient mix.
Okay, right.
And it's adjusted automatically.
And how long do the plants stay in here? So once you've loaded up all your racks, I can see plants at different states of growth. Yeah. Or do they all come in at the same time, or there are different batches?
They all come in different batches. Each of these tags that we have on them have a date that they were. So that was planted a week ago, and they all have different length of growth cycles. So a lettuce is 4.5 weeks. Sprouts are generally two weeks, and everything else is kind of in between.
Right. Okay.
That compares favourably to the growth cycles in traditional agriculture, because we grow with a consistent level of light, 16 hours a day, and a highly nutrified solution. So they're never short of water, they're never short of nutrients, they're never short of light, and so our growth cycles are generally 30% shorter than you find in the field. Okay. Which means that the farm is the equivalent. One farm like this is the equivalent of about a hectare's worth of traditional farmland. Well, at least in terms of output, in terms of biomass yield, because we're extracting around 10 to 12 harvests per
year from our farms, whereas in traditional agriculture you might get 1, maximum 3. We are a much more concentrated version of agriculture.
Yeah, wow. Looks very impressive, very high tech.
It's cool, isn't it? I mean, it's you can talk about controlled environment agriculture till you blue in the face, but until you actually walk into one of these funky looking farms, it didn't. I wasn't sold. But when I walked in here, I was like, okay, well, this is the job I need to take, because this is in some way, shape, or form the future of food.